to episode 301 of Late Night Linux. I'm Joe, and with me are Fadim.
How's it going?
Graham.
Good evening.
And Will.
Hello.
Let's get straight on with our discoveries then. Will, GitHub CLI tool.
If you spend a lot of time in GitHub, as I do, pretty much all day, every day, then ultimately clicking around to update things gets a bit tedious, and you want to start using some sort of API to update issues or move things around in update statuses and so on. And you can do that through the API, and that's fine. But GH is the GitHub official command line tool, which wraps the API, but does it with a bog standard like bash CLI tool and makes things very easy to use. It abstracts away all of the complexity, and it's genuinely quite easy and nice to use, and I recommend everybody tries it. But more importantly than that is that you can also run GH commands via a GitHub action, and so now you can put your commands into GitHub and have it trigger them when certain things need to happen. And so you can start building automations within GitHub to run as GitHub actions that you can develop on your desktop using your normal development processes. So it's a nice, easy way of interacting with the GitHub API without having to learn all of it, and very easily port that straight into a GitHub action and automate it.
Get yourself nicely locked into Microsoft services. Fadim, Doug.
Yes. So if you've ever had to work on a project which requires DNS to be worldwide for anything, Doug is a great way to check not just the local resolver that you're near, also a few around the world, which I think are run by the company who sponsors the project. I'm not 100% sure of that, but what this goes out and does is it checks from various regions of the world whether it can access stuff and what percentage of access it has and how well your DNS replication has happened. And it's shockingly low for some of them, like really, really bad, which I don't know, might be down to bad monitoring nodes out on those ends, or it could be like, I guess, government interference, who knows. But yeah, it's quite an interesting tool, and if you are dealing with any regions, it might be a good way to check to whether stuff has appeared out there.
Right, because all I ever do is, does it work with my ISP, and does it work on my phone not connected to Wi-Fi, so just using mobile internet, so effectively my other ISP. And the phone always beats my wired ISP. But this actually could be very useful for checking that, the DNS is propagated. But it sounds like it's quite depressing in that you'll find that it just takes a lot longer than you thought.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at ours, we're not doing too great in South America for some reason. I don't know why that is. Late Night Linux is bizarrely low there. I don't know why. I mean, to be honest, this could be part of the fact that the nodes out there that are doing the testing, maybe there's an issue with them. I don't know.
Right. So you can only use it with their nodes then? You can't put in custom ones?
Don't know, to be quite honest. It is open source, so you could make any changes you want in theory, but I guess it has to have some sort of network to talk to. So, yeah, you've got me there. I don't know.
I have a feeling that I've tried this before, and you can provide it with a text file of alternate hosts, and it will just go through them one at a time. But I might be getting confused with a different project there.
That would be cool if you could. Don't see it, mind you.
When Doug reads server data from squiggly line /.doug servers.csv, blah, 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 it tells you how to create servers in there, I think.
Oh, nice.
So I was right. You can do that. Excellent.
Sweet. I don't have a dot directory. I'm using the snap, so I guess my config would be somewhere in the snap directory. I don't know. I haven't a clue.
No one does.
Yeah, it's just a complete mystery. Maybe ask on the Snapcraft forums. I'm sure they'll help. Graham, what is Acid Vice?
Okay, so I'm sorry, this is niche, even for me.
Oh, Jesus.
Vice is the popular Commodore 64 emulator. It's been around for a long time. It's brilliant at running Commodore 64 games. It has its own sound emulation, which is also very good. And it's also, you can plug in different sound emulation for the SID chips that were used in the Commodore 64 to generate sound.
Acid, A-S-I-D.
Yeah.
SID chips.
So ACID is actually a MIDI protocol that comes back from, I don't know if any of you are into like musical equipment, but Electron creates these amazing kind of drum machines. And Electron's first device back in the late 90s was basically a synthesizer built around the SID chip called the SID station. And to be able to send real chiptune data from a Commodore 64 to their SID station. They created this protocol they called ASID, A-S-I-D. So this protocol carries the chiptune sound data over MIDI to a real SID chip. Right. So ACID Vice is a fork of Vice with support for the ACID MIDI protocol to SID chips, to real external SID chips that you may have in an external box. There are quite a few external boxes that support this ACID protocol. I've got one called MIDI Box SID. So now with this, you can play games emulated in Vice with real sound output to a real SID chip that you just connect with USB MIDI or with a real MIDI cable. And it sounds amazing. It really makes the difference because SID chips are imperfect, they're imprecise, and they sound clunky and not at all like the pristine emulations that are always the same every single time. I mean, it's just brilliant going through your games library. And rather than just playing chip tunes on these synthesizers, actually just playing those games that you used to like with a real SID chip without a real Commodore 64.
See, those SID chips, are they like things that you can buy these days? Because, I mean, I remember you talking about it before and you said they were quite rare and it was to get a proper one was quite difficult.
It's because the filters are actually analog inside the digital chips. They're all made in different batches on different weeks and they're really susceptible to being broken. So very few of them kind of survive all this time. But now I think there are very good copies and clones of those original chips that you can get that are cheap. There are small little programmable devices you can use to emulate SIDs as well. And I'm not sure what the actual price is. I'd have to type them in. But they're still expensive, I think, compared to what they are.
Let's do some feedback then. Mike writes, in episode 253, you discovered archivebox.io. There's a related but more altruistic project that I don't think you mentioned, the Archive Team Warrior, and that's at archiveteam.org. It's a container image or container image wrapped in a VM, your choice, that you set up on a preferably but not necessarily residential IP and let it store stuff from the internet into the Internet Archive. Sort of like the distributed computing of yesteryear, but for archiving information. Is there any chance of getting some publicity for the project? I'm just one of the many volunteers not affiliated in any other way. Well, yes, Mike. This is your publicity.
Do you understand what this thing actually does? I'm not sure I understand.
Not a fucking clue.
You had a link previously in our doc, which was to a Telegram instance where they, as he rightly says, was talking about they archive stuff because there's a lot of even journalistic or first-hand experience of stuff going on in Ukraine, say, and all of those videos that are going back and forth between the two, and they're like hauling that all in from the public channels and stuff. So I guess it's a bit of a live version of archive.org, maybe, that does things more than just websites.
Sounds like it.
That's what I think, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, interesting.
It is interesting, and we'll link to it in the show notes, so check it out if you think it's interesting. And I don't know, maybe someone could write in and tell us exactly what it does. Daniel writes, in the myth, you need the terminal to use Linux. The actual myth is that you wouldn't need the terminal with other systems. With all of them, you find instructions online, or even with official support reps, to use the terminal to fix problems. My favorite example that I had happen to me was when Microsoft support had me run PowerShell commands. I promise it was real Microsoft initiated by me, not a scam. I did read all the commands before running to fix a Teams company domain to not be entangled with some other company's guest whatever. It was purely cloud bullshit and still required the command line to unentangle.
That is slightly terrifying that their company got mixed into someone else's. Okay.
And Daniel also says plenty of macOS problems also require command line solutions. I think that's true, isn't it, really?
Especially with Active Directory, I've seen lots of stuff like that is PowerShell, realistically speaking. I don't know about macOS. I've no clue.
And I had a weird update problem on an X270 that set up with Windows 10, and I think the only way to fix that was with the command line.
I've had that too, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a very valid point, Daniel.
WUA client or some shite like that, isn't it?
I've blocked it out of my memory.
Yeah, well, I try to.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Entroware. Go to entroware.com. Entroware sells computers with Ubuntu and Ubuntu Mate pre-installed. They've got a range of desktops, laptops, and servers, and most parts are configurable, so you can pick the CPU, RAM, and storage that's right for you. If you can't find exactly what you want, then do contact them and they'll work with you on a bespoke solution that's perfect for your needs. They ship to the UK, Republic of Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And if you do buy one of their machines, there's a little drop down at checkout and you can select Late Night Linux so they'll know that we sent you. So go to entroware.com for all your Linux computing needs. On to a bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to get in contact, you can email show@latenightlinux.com. I'm now joined by Jason Evangelho. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's been an awfully long time since we've spoken to each other on a podcast.
Yeah, it has. On a podcast, it's been 5 years?
Something like that, I think, yeah. But we've kept in touch. But anyway, recently you stopped working on Thunderbird and went back to your first two loves of gaming and writing. So you're back at Forbes writing about gaming, right?
Indeed, yeah. Kind of I like to call it that exciting intersection of PC gaming and Linux. That's where my comfort zone is.
Yeah, and hardware as well, right?
Definitely hardware.
Now, what I've noticed from your writing is that Linux gaming and Windows gaming are very similar in terms of frame rates and performance now. Some games and some systems, Windows might just edge it, and then other ones, Linux might edge it. We are now no longer in a situation where all of the graphs and charts are Windows best and then Linux almost there. We've crossed a threshold. We're there.
To put it bluntly, yes, we're there. It's really interesting, especially for me, because I was pretty detached from the news cycle, the daily news cycle, the updates from Liam at Gaming on Linux all the time. And so I sort of stepped away from it all for about 2.5 years. And then you come back and you start paying attention to what the performance looks like on Linux gaming and all the verified games and like all the advancements in Proton. And it's staggering. It is staggering how much the Linux community has accomplished in, let's say 3 years, right? Look at March of 2022, about a month after the Steam Deck launched. There were 1,000 verified or playable games on Steam Deck. Today, there are 16,000 verified and playable games on Steam Deck. And that's like, think about it in terms of a game console like the Xbox, right? Or the Switch. That's less than half of a console generation. It's less than the time that Windows 11 has existed. Linux gaming has become a force. What I've observed that I think is really important is the fact that a year or so after the Steam Deck launched, the conversation around Linux gaming, or the conversation around the Steam Deck in particular, was Linux was a downside, right? It was a compromise. It was, well, here's this great hardware and here's this great interface, but Linux.
Yeah, but then people started to put Windows on it and it was a worse experience for them.
Yeah, and so now, like, fast forward a couple years and the handheld PC gaming market is exploding. You've got Asus coming out with the ROG Ally, or the ROG Ally. I don't know how to say ROG.
It's ROG in my head.
It's ROG in my head, too. The ROG Ally, the Lenovo Legion Go. And now you have people getting these devices that are shipped with Windows and putting Linux on it and preferring that experience. Now, like, only 3 years later, instead of being a drawback, Linux is being celebrated.
Why is that, though? Like, I get it with the Steam Deck. That was a Linux-first machine, but a machine that ships with Windows, how can it possibly be a better experience with Linux? This is such an alien idea to me.
Because Windows 11 is not made for a small display.
Right.
Period. It just doesn't work on a small display. It's cramped. It doesn't scale well. The app interfaces are not built for touch. I'm not saying I liked Windows 8, but Windows 8 took a step in the right direction towards being a mobile-friendly Windows operating system. And then they kind of reversed course because people hated it, right? Windows Phone failed and all of that. And, you know, at the same time, you've got Valve, who built a purpose-built interface. It's made for the hardware. It's made for Steam. It's made for gaming. And it feels comfortable, right? It's responsive. It's more responsive than putting Windows on the same device.
But surely once you're into Steam, there's not much difference. So, like, if you've got a ROG Ally that's got Windows on it, once you've opened Steam, isn't that a very similar experience to running it on top of Bazite, for example?
No. Windows has so much that they want to do and show you in the middle of everything that you want to do on this device, you know? All the nags, all the updates. Okay, so one key difference, in my opinion, is Asus and Lenovo are sort of cramming this extra software on top of Windows in order to accomplish the same feature set that the Steam Deck has.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like the performance overlays and the GPU throttling and scaling and just all the advanced stuff that's just right there on the sidebar when you're using a Steam Deck. And they've sort of had to shoehorn this software into Windows to make it resemble the experience of a Steam Deck.
Right.
And why not just use SteamOS? Why not just, you know? And so that's what I mean by the conversation shifting, is that now the Steam Deck has, like, in my view, become this gateway, this portal into Linux gaming, because these manufacturers are just trying to ape the experience that you get on a Steam Deck.
Well, I know that you really got this love for the handheld devices, but what about traditional gaming, PC gaming, keyboard, mouse, big monitor? Where are we with that? Like, surely Windows is the best experience for that still.
If you want to play a game that has kernel level anti-cheat, like Valorant or Call of Duty or Destiny 2 or Fortnite, if you really want to play those games, sure, go play them on Windows because it's the only place that they'll work. But in my experience testing games nonstop on a bunch of different systems lately, everything just works on Linux now. Like, if it's a single player game that has launched on Steam or Ubisoft or Epic Games and that doesn't have anti-cheat, it's going to run. And it's going to run well. That's where we are. There's no more like headlines of, oh, look, Forza 5 launched and it runs on Linux. There's no more of that. Now the headline is, I don't remember, I wrote a headline like this, but Forza Horizon 5 at high quality settings on a 1440p or 1080p monitor, exactly the same frame rates as Linux.
Without the Windows bullshit.
Without the Windows bullshit. And really, like, Joe, if you think about it, if I play a game on Linux and I play the same game on Windows and they have equal performance, Linux gets that win.
Just by default.
By default, because not only is it less bullshit, it's the fact that when you consider the overhead that is there with Proton, and Proton's I'm sure you guys have talked about it a lot, the compatibility layer that makes all this possible. With the overhead of that running, and you're getting a tie, that's remarkable. If you were to run just, there's a benchmark called Furmark 2. They built a native Linux version this time around. And so there's a native Linux version and a Windows version. They both run a pure, like really heavy Vulkan API benchmark. Linux wins that by 35%.
Right.
So that shows you where the capability is for the future. This is anecdotal, but as I'm testing just a bunch of different games and I'm talking to the community about their gaming experience, I'm noticing that older games launch more reliably on Linux than on Windows. You take Wolfenstein Youngblood, for example. You launch it on Windows and it complains that you don't have the latest driver. It says like, you know, AMD 17.0 required, you have AMD 0000, when in fact I have AMD 24. whatever,
right, because
I just updated a week ago. You run that on Linux and it just works. Those experiences are happening more and more lately. And I don't know how Microsoft has managed to take such a legacy OS and kernel and make the experience increasingly worse.
That's so strange because I've been known to run software that I ran on Windows XP in Windows 11 and it works fine. I mean, it's single-threaded, obviously, but it works just fine. And you're telling me that games that are not even that old are now starting to work more reliably under Proton.
there's a lot of power in the open source community. There's a lot of passionate, dedicated people working on the graphics stack. Like that's what they do. They make Linux gaming better. And a lot of them are paid to do that. The people from Red Hat or from Ubuntu or, Canonical or, elsewhere. Look at what Glorious Eggroll, if you've heard of him. Look at what he's done with his own take on Fedora called Nobara, which is a gaming-centric distro that's built on Fedora. And I don't know what Microsoft is doing. I don't have insight into their graphics team, the people working on kernels and drivers, and I don't know. But I don't want to sound melodramatic, but it's almost shocking in the best way to have stepped away from this ecosystem for 3 years and then to come back and see how much better it's doing in such a short time.
And it really does all come back to the Steam Deck, right? Like, that's why we've got Proton, because they were leading up to the Steam Deck. And that's why so many games now work on Linux, is because of Proton and the Steam Deck.
Talk about Valve playing the long game. From the failure of Steam machines way back in, 2013, 2014, to the first iteration of Proton and then the Steam Deck. And this is what blows my mind. Think about the fact that there's an entire segment of the PC market, the handheld PCs, the devices from 1X Player, from Valve, from Asus, from Lenovo, from MSI even. And that segment has grown and become popular, and it's being designed around a Linux device. A Linux device is now the benchmark.
Yeah.
A Linux gaming device is the benchmark for success, and everyone's trying to copy that success. I think that's incredible.
Well, we kind of all saw this coming, or at least wanted to see this coming. It's like the opposite of a slow motion car crash or train wreck or whatever. It's like we saw back in the day when they first launched Proton, like we had these really high hopes for it. And slowly but surely, just incrementally, we've now got to the point where Linux is on a par with Windows. The asterisk with the anti-cheat stuff and multiplayer, but we are basically there. As I said at the beginning of this conversation, we are basically there now.
You've seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I'm sure most people have.
Yeah.
I am picturing that scene of the knight far off in the distance running towards the castle, and it just keeps, showing the guards looking on in interest, and the knight's like not making any progress. He's not getting any closer. And then about 5 or 6 camera cuts later, he's all of a sudden at the castle, stabbing them and running in. That's the year of desktop Linux. That's what it looks like to me. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah. If desktop Linux means gaming, which it does to you, because that is your first love since you were a child, a very small child.
And so, I mean, honestly, there are going to be exceptions, and I'm sure that there is going to be breakage here and there when a driver update comes out or a game update comes out. But if you're not playing a game that has really intrusive anti-cheat, you're pretty much good to go on Linux, and you're going to get the same experience or better.
Yeah, in some cases better from your benchmarks at least.
It's exciting. And now there's just so much. There's so much to talk about.
Well, we will definitely have to talk again about this stuff as you dive deeper into it and write more articles and everything. So you'll definitely have to come back and tell us all about it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back next week when it'll probably be news and stuff, but we'll have to see. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phelan.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Will.
See you later.